who are willing to join us, very generous with their time, so that we can look at their work. And you know that this talk you may have seen is called Burbs to Boroughs, Classrooms to Discos. And you're going to see why it's called that, because we're going to be seeing the work of Meryl, who, you know, it really has basically made her archive public only really in the last years. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. And it happens to cover some really wonderful facets of her life, starting in the suburbs, North Massapequa, out in Long Island. At one point, she was certainly in Manhattan a lot and going out to the hot clubs of the 1970s in Manhattan, and then eventually became a teacher in the New York public school system for, I think it was 30 years, Meryl. So it was only after she retired that she started making her incredible archive of photographs available. And now she's got books and she's got shows. And it really is this archive that covers all these wonderful facets of New York, whether it's, you know, family in suburbia in Long Island, or the discos like Studio 54, or students in her own classroom. So let's get started. I actually wanted you to know that Meryl's had this unbelievable summer, I would say, well, spring, summer. And I hope I don't throw her off too much, but I thought I would start with just some of the images of these shows she's had, because Meryl actually had 3 simultaneous shows across New York State. One of them, which opened since March, was up in Syracuse.
And it's still, this is the last day. They extended it until today.
They extended this one. That's right. This one was extended. And by the way, I think, and we'll talk, Meryl, about this, but I want you to start looking at the titles of not only Meryl's books, but her shows, because a lot of what happens here, this theme, for instance, of the best of times, worst of times, which we know originally comes from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. What Meryl and her shows and her books do is that they really give us a look at New York of the late 70s and early 80s, and showing us that there was some wonderful stuff going on that was fun and glamorous, and some stuff that was really actually quite difficult. So we'll be talking about that. One of the other shows at Clamp Art, one of the galleries that represents Meryl, I got to go to this one. And again, we'll talk about this. The shows mix some of the earlier black and white work from the 70s with Studio 54 and CBGBs and a lot of the excitement of New York clubs, with some of the tougher, very personal and sometimes tough images of Bushwick, where she taught. And then this show, Meryl, is actually still up. Yep. So this was just to let you know that we are in the presence of a photographer that suddenly came on the scene. And not only does she have multiple shows, but I have to say that the press that Meryl's been getting is unbelievable. I mean, we're talking publications like the New Yorker, Harper's, you name it. I mean, a lot of attention to her archive. So Meryl, before we get started, I just want to make sure, like, we say hello to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure. We'll discuss later, but I do want to say that throughout my career, since I moved to New York in 1975, I've always been showing. It's just not to this extent. I've always, not out of nowhere, but I didn't go into this work until that, but we'll talk about that later. So
okay, thanks for clarifying. Yeah. I had this idea that, you know, suddenly There she
Yeah,
is.
oh, there are things that I'm showing that I never even dreamed of, yes, in the books and all that, but I have always exhibited my work.
Okay,
We'll talk about that afterwards, but I just want you to know didn't come out of a barrel.
good to know. And
Yes.
and by the way, I took the freedom to put together this timeline. Meryl, of course, did review it. And I just thought that it would kind of frame, who's Meryl Meisler and where did she start out and how is it that she, wound up looking at these things and shooting these things and bringing eventually these books and shows. And Meryl, you can jump in at any point, but
Sure.
you were born in 1951 in the Bronx. And by the way, my mom, Helene, who's on the call, was born in the Bronx too. So there you go.
There you go. Yeah.
And her brother, my uncle, and my cousins, lived in Long Island. So very familiar with Long Island suburbs. And that's where Meryl grew up in North Massapequa.
Yes, the age of 2.5, when I was 2.5 and moved there.
And didn't you tell me, Meryl, that there's this funny nickname, Matza Pizza?
Yes, the town I'm from, Massapequa, was probably still predominantly second generation Americans of a whole lot of Jewish and Italian and Irish and German and all that, but matzo pizza, and everybody knows that's what it is. Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
Meryl went to school in SUNY Buffalo and then also eventually went to the University of Wisconsin. And I understand, Meryl, that's where you first really got exposed and took a course in photography. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. Yes. I didn't catch it, but I actually went to SUNY College at Buffalo, where I became an art education major. And when I went to University of Wisconsin, I was undecided whether or not to go on to grad school, but I needed it to make my teaching certification permanent. And I decided to take a photography class because why not? And for me, what I've heard it was a good department. And so I took a introduction to photography class, and there's only one professor there, Cavalier Ketchum. So I took an introduction to photography, and he was showing us, I learned how to use a real camera and develop film, and he showed us the work of a lot of the documentary photographers and people from the WPA and the Works Administration, and the work that stood out to me was before I went there, I saw the show of the retrospective of Dion Arbus's work, and it struck me. It felt, and then I decided to take a class, and then I saw in the college class he showed the work of Jacques-Henri Lartigue, a French photographer who decades later in his life, he started showing the work that he took as a child of his Parisian family, just having a ball, having fun, just playing. And when I went home, my first vacation, instinctively, I started doing self-portraits and some of the costumes, because his work was about costume and playing, and I started photographing my family and friends, and I'll go in neighbors. More into that, but that was it was an immediate gut reaction.
I love that. And by the way, the way I organized this particular talk today is in much more of a chronological order than you normally would see Meryl's work at the galleries. It tends to mix it up more, but I thought it would be useful to go through the timeline because indeed we're going to see Meryl's work in the suburbs of, both her family and neighbors and friends in kind of the Lartigue fashion, and then some self-portraits. One of the things that's really interesting about this slide is to recognize that Meryl came back to New York from school in 75. And so I included these kind of, iconic moments of Studio 54 opening. There's the crowd outside, the famous crowd in 1977. Some of you may remember, I was actually here visiting grandparents, the big New York blackout of 77. And that's relevant because one of the places where Meryl will wind up working some years later is Bushwick. And Bushwick was famously one of the neighborhoods that really suffered of fires and looting and whatnot, and really was kind of one of the neighborhoods that was very much in the news during the blackout. And then of course, Studio 54 closes. So I wanted to give you the timeline because this is gonna be a period in which Meryl was really busy out there photographing. And then just to give you this sense that this is when she went to work for the public school system. And it's just amazing from 79 to 2010. And very specifically, and we will see some photographs of the Roland Hayes Intermediate School, which is another name for junior high in Bushwick. And I think that the last point to make on this slide is that it really is, I think, Meryl, starting in 2014, that your incredible archive started getting published. So these are some of the many books now that are available. Meryl, any other thoughts on this particular slide?
No, I think you, I guess people might say, what is the CETA Artist Grant? This is
Yes.
1978. CETA stood for Comprehensive Employment Training Act. It was essentially like the WPA of the 70s. And
Yeah.
it was the only time I ever made a living as a photographer. For a year and a half, almost 2 years, I was hired as a documentary photographer, a CETA photographer for the American Jewish Congress, and I created an archive of Jewish New York, and also explored my roots. And part of my my community service, I chose to teach photography because even though I graduated with a degree in art education, I was scared to teach. And it gave me, it was an employment. It did what it needed to do. It actually gave me the courage to go out and apply for a job and get a job as a teacher. So these artist grants, they work. They're seed money, but it also gave me a more confidence and belief in what I was doing and seeing. So I didn't just do my CETA work by day. I was, a young person going out at night. And so I wasn't going to photograph, I was going dancing.
I love it.
And I didn't believe it or not, you'll see a lot of clubs, but I didn't photograph all the ones I went to. I'm glad I did the ones I did.
I love it.
I had good times the other one, but the nice side of those pictures show. And the books, yes, you have the order correct. The first book was published in 2014, A Tale of Two Cities, Discover Bushwick. And I'll talk about, and then the second one was in 2015, Purgatories in Paradise, Sassy 70s in Suburban City. The first book contrasts Bushwick and going out. And would this be a good time to say why why you're going to see that work together? I guess I already said it. So I was very surprised to find myself become a school teacher in Bushwick. But I was there and I enjoyed it and all those things, and continued and left my career, the second half of my career at School Manhattan. But on the night of the blackout, I was literally on my way to Studio 54 because my disco buddy, Judy Juper, and I were invited to a private party by one of the owners. And we'd never been invited to a private party before. And so we were very excited. And we go out and the blackout happened. And I didn't know it was a blackout, just knew the subways weren't running. And the buses didn't seem to be running. So we took our bicycles to Studio 54, and it was closed. The next morning, the world and we found out it was a major blackout. And that was the first time I ever heard of this neighborhood called Bushwick, because it was an area that through many years of distress erupted during the days of blackout with looting and fires, and I never thought it would be part of my life, of course. And henceforth, 4 years later, I found myself teaching there. But let's jump forward. In 2011, I'm exhibiting in Bushwick, so I show my Bushwick photographs, and I get invited to I'll go more into it, but I get invited to a drag burlesque club called Bazaar in Bushwick, because the guy was interested in showing my work there in the basement. I'll go into one. And I go to the club is hopping. It's packed. There's a disco ball overhead. I go into the restroom. There's a disco ball over my head, and I had an epiphany right there in the restroom, putting on my lipstick, that my worlds collided. That when I was going to the discos in the 70s, people from the Bridge and Tamil crowd were frowned upon for the snobbier clubs. They weren't even allowed in, even though the owners were from Brooklyn. And then here I am, like 2010, we're talking about decades later, and the hot club scene and art scene is in Bushwick.
Right.
Disco ball in my head, and it just hit me that these two worlds of my life came together, and so that's I knew that this club was the right place even to show the work, and I'll go more into that later. The second book, Sassy 70s, juxtaposes growing up on Long Island and my life and my family and friends in Long Island, neighbors, against in contrast to moving to New York City, more streets and nightlife. And the third book is just really, it's actually arriving next week. This series, it's arriving by the big slow boat next week. There were 100 copies flown out expressly for the openings, but due to pandemic, it's coming. Books are coming next week.
Oh my.
And it expands upon the theme of disco and Bushwick, but brings you into the classroom. So here we go, 2021.
Oh, that's great. That's great background, Meryl, on how the epiphany happened. And you're right, what was called, it's so ironic, because I remember the bridge and tunnel was like, oh, those people from the outer boroughs are coming to Manhattan, we don't like them. And now the fun and the excitement is in Brooklyn and elsewhere, and that's where the fun is, right?
Right.
So I did put together just these quick maps. I call them relevant New York geographies, because for some of you that may not be New Yorkers, we're going to be referencing some places in and around New York. So this happens to be where Meryl grew up, 10 Hampton Road in North Massapequa. This is Long Island. She obviously would eventually work here in the borough of Brooklyn. I included, obviously, we'll see this in a little more detail, Studio 54. I live right 2 blocks from there. And then this is Fire Island, which has always been kind of a very gay-friendly, gay mecca of excitement and fun. Not all of it, but certainly some of it, and we're going to be referencing that as well. Here's this wonderful picture of, a recent picture of the Bushwick Intermediate School where Meryl taught. Meryl, this is actually a picture, I think, of your house or whatever.
It definitely is. It definitely is. It was brown with shutters, but that is 10 Hampton Road.
Isn't that crazy? Like, this is what you can do on Google now. You can find an address and take the picture, and there it is. And these are the ferries that go out to Fire Island, because Fire Island is not accessible by car. And then more specifically, some of the clubs we're going to be referencing, I went back and I was looking at the addresses. Studio 54, of course, on West 54th, just 2 blocks from me. There was a club called Gigi Barnum Room. And then we're going to talk about Les Mouches, which is, it was in the famous Otis elevator building. Xenon was a club. I'll show you what's there now. And CBGB, which, by the way, in my research for this talk, I never knew this. It was Country, Bluegrass, and Blues Club. So if you ever wondered what CBGB was supposed to mean, it was originally about that. It wound up being about punk rock, but that was the original intent. And I know this is kind of sad, but I did the map of like what's in those places now. And in a way, it's just to say that what Meryl captured really is in some ways a time capsule, because I mean, the Studio 54 Club is now a theater. We like that, you know. It's got a wonderful 54 Below, wonderful cabaret. This club is now a sushi restaurant. And then the Xenon is the Stephen Sondheim Theater. And then CBGB's is a swanky John Varvatos designer store. But they're all there. It's just that there's something different. And it was my way of saying, you know, things in New York really are always changing. And I'm glad Meryl captured that moment.
I'd like to interject because I think it's so funny. Well, of course, Studio 54 was that it was a former theater. So it was
that's right.
When it was there was like, I heard it was at Sullivan Theater, there was all these, you know, the booms for the camera people. But it makes me laugh that it's Black Sushi, because Gigi Barnum's was really a club that gender fluid people, gender variant people,
right,
and and people, mostly people of color, or many people of color, hang over. So Black Sushi sounds like a good name for
That's very funny.
And I understand that Xenon, besides being considered a more classy club, like it was Xenon, almost rivaled 54. It was in its interim between like heydays of theater in New York, and when at one point it was a porn theater.
Oh, yes, that's how New York is, right? It's like, and now we went to see the Carole King musical, Beautiful there.
Yes. It's all very New York.
So let's start with, this is some of the photography you took that really takes us to kind of your world in Massapequa. And you know, I love these photographs because, well, number one, they have that kind of very intimate snapshot sense of them, where you're really taking us inside this dining room at Rosh Hashanah. And I have to say, Meryl, my sense was that a lot of your photographs in the suburbs in Massapequa, they're very upbeat, they're very happy, there's something very welcoming about them. And this is a really familiar scene to me. Certainly when I visited family in Long Island, I always found them very festive, very loud, very fun. I always would go back to Mexico City and tell my mom, oh my God, they're so loud over there. I love this. I know this was featured recently in some magazines. Tell us about this, Meryl, because this is your mom.
Oh, we're actually, it's the wedding of a friend of mine's mother's second wedding. She was a widow, and my mom came along because she was friends with the mother and I was friends with the daughter, and they all, you know, and I was already passionate about photography. And that's my mom, her name was Sunny, spontaneously just put a dollar bill on her head and was dancing. And it's probably like the Miserlou or a Greek dance or something like that. Some just a lot of spirit, a lot of great dancing at these fairs, as you know. So,
yes,
that's just my mom. She's a boy, and the picture before of it's my dad's at. I'll just go back 1 second. My dad, who's sitting there with a T-shirt.
Yes.
My dad was a printer by trade. He was an excellent photographer. So he was really proud that I was photographing. And yes, there was a lot of joy, but it was a lot of angst. My parents ended up divorcing, like, separating a year later. So,
Oh, yeah.
well, that, but it's family, no matter what.
Yeah.
And I have that chandelier over my head, and my brother has this piece, and my other brother has other piece. So it's a lot of joy.
I love this too, like in the midst of, is that a French fry?
Oh, not on Rosh Hashanah. It's probably the bone from.
Oh, okay. I know. You have French fries at Rosh Hashanah.
The same dance. I mean, look at those dancers. I mean, they were good.
I know. I mean, this is incredible. And I also think it's very interesting that you were photographing this, and then we're gonna see some people kind of letting their hair down in Studio 54. So again, it's like different geography, but in a way really fun, upbeat, people having fun. And this is where, you know, I took the freedom to start comparing some of your work to artists that you said had inspired you, because if we look at someone like that, and Lartigue very early on was very interested in people in the midst of moving. And Suzanne Lenglen was actually one of the French champions of tennis.
Wow.
And here, you know, he captures again this moment of, you know, humans in the air. And then this other photograph by Lartigue also made me think of your photography, because it's like different place, different time, but this is Simone on her 76th birthday. That's quite a jump at 76 too.
That's quite a jump at any age. That's quite a capture.
Exactly.
This guy had moves, you know, people get our moves.
And then, as you know, Meryl, I thought that we would show a few of your self-portraits that you talked about. I think they're really interesting because, you know, in contrast to your family photos that have all the dancers and everyone together, there's something really introspective about these. It's almost like you took a break, you went off on your own, and again, in keeping almost with the Diane Arbus, you know, the portraiture, took some photographs of yourself, and this is you doing the Girl Scout oath.
Yep, and my full uniform, even the braids, my actual braids, but they were cut off when I was going to Girl Scout camp. But my parents thought I'd come back with bugs, so I got a pixie haircut, but my mom saved the braids, put it in a bag. And this is a self-portrait that I intend to retake this year. I'm turning a mile mark a year, one 1951 in the bath, and I think it's time to redo it. You have to get it from.
I love it, and of course, we can definitely say that the kind of patterns and fabric are very 70s.
Very 70s and very low garment.
And you know, I found this image of one of the people you admired and inspired, Diane Arbus, and well, here it's a woman, you know, with a baby monkey. Arbus loved this kind of thing that's really odd and kind of unusual, but I couldn't help but to look at the uncanny similarity of the sofa.
It blows my mind because I really never saw this picture, and oh my God, yes, you can see the patterns and the paneling and everything about it. It's like it shocked me, and the bars, work with the bar, you know, that's a pull-out bed. It's like, oh my goodness.
I know.
Our Rubber's room, that's probably her second bedroom.
It's only
just amazing.
It's only 4 years later. It's
yes.
Crazy. When I bumped into it, I couldn't believe it. And then, you know, I can tell that you had some fun with your camera, because here we've got you self-portrait of falling star. And tell us about this. I think you were a ballerina, or you took dance classes.
Yeah, yes. My parents know, of course, their children, because they certainly grew up very poor during the Depression. Literally had.
I just gotta get my. Okay.
let me just make sure I mute everyone real quick, and
Okay.
let's make sure you get sorry, let me make sure that you're unmuted. Okay.
All right. Okay. So growing up, it took ballet, tap, piano. I think I took everything but art lessons. Good thing, 'cause that's why I became an artist. But twirling and up in the attic. I mean, I wonder why I'm a big saver. My parents both were, but they're up in the attic with my, recital outfits and tap shoes and ballet shoes. And like I said, it was a gut instinct. And I think it was definitely influenced by seeing Lartigue's portraits, because what is fashion is also costume.
Right.
Years later, it looks like costume. And so I donned my ballerina and tap outfits and Girl Scout outfits, and would set up a tripod, inexpensive lights, light the place like a Broadway stage, and would have a friend or this would be a friend, because I down in front of my brother, but I let my breasts hang out. A friend, I set it up and said, just take the picture. And so this is an early self-portrait.
I love it. It has this performance side to it, of course. And it is this idea of kind of you shooting yourself or with a friend, and it's about your body in relation to this space. And as you know, I compare this to a woman that's very well regarded, Francesca Woodman. She is known for doing up to about 800 different images of herself in her own surroundings. Hers can be a little bit more haunting and dramatic because she often uses long exposure, and they look very haunting and almost ghostly. She looks almost crucified. And she did sadly commit suicide at 22. So there's a much darker side to Francesca Woodman. But the fact that you're women and you're women photographing yourselves, and you're photographing yourselves in these spaces. And if you look at the prints, they're actually square. So I think, again, there's this very, very interesting affinity here.
Well, I was definitely influenced, but you can see, Orbis's format and style. And my teacher said, well, some golden rules, can't go over to square. Sophie's commented the leopard spray gets it's a cougar. That cougar is literally in dining room now. What really freaks me out, I have 2 homes. I have a house in Woodstock here. This credenza, the black, is in my lobby right here in New York.
Oh my God.
This past weekend, making room for the arrival of 1,400 boxes of books. 1,400 books arriving. I unpacked boxes that have been put away since my parents passed away and moved. And I literally, in the last few days, opened up boxes with many of the photographs on the wall of the living room.
Oh.
Just open them up. And my brothers and I are going through them to decide, who takes that, who takes what. And the other ones can't just put them away. I have to place them somewhere with somebody.
Yeah.
So this is really shocking to me. It almost more than the Orbis picture, the monkey. Today, like I just unwrapped these pictures on the wall.
Wow. This one, I know it's a little bit intimate. We have all adults in the room here in the Zoom. I thought this was fascinating, and you can tell us more about it, but I love that it's Thanksgiving. Here's Meryl kind of, I'm gonna go behind closed doors. I'm wearing very intimate outfit here. And not only are you covering yourself, almost like veiling your face, but the camera is strapped around you in such a way that, if I may say so, almost winds up looking a little bit like a phallic symbol. And to me, for so many years, there's been talk about women being kind of the, just, you know, the subject of the male gaze. And, you know, there's something about shooting photographs that's very aggressive. It's about shooting. And there's something here about you almost saying, I'm the photographer, and I'm photographing myself. And the camera is almost like I'm the one doing the shooting. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it.
No. Well, it never had a title. I chose to, it was taken in my childhood bedroom I grew up in. I was in, another influence was at the University of Wisconsin, across from the darkroom, there was a poster in the hallway by the artist Linda Bangless. And Linda had many portraits where she put gum on her body. There was one where it was actually like a full page in art form, wearing a huge dildo. It was,
Oh yes, I know that one, yes.
and so that was an influence. And it's also empowerment. And yes, I am a lesbian, but that's besides the point.
Right.
It's I guess more power or the power of the photography, but I never showed this, even though I did print it, but I had to show it, my first show by Stephen Cash Gallery, and he chose this picture. I couldn't believe it. I blushed to think of it. And so in the book, I just called it Untitled Film Still, referencing another photographer from Long Island, Cindy Sherman. But actually, I was not familiar with Cindy Sherman when I was doing these self-portraits. She had not been known yet, and yet she went to the same school I went to, Buffalo State.
Unbelievable.
I never took a photography course there.
I love that. And by the way, once again, Francesca Woodman, I compared this to, you know, in this particular image, I have to say she's almost wearing something so similar, at least. She's covering her face. She's in this very kind of sexy outfit. And again, it's this almost very introspective. This is me and my camera and my body in this space. And as you know, Meryl, I did compare you to Cindy Sherman.
Yeah.
Because again,
who couldn't look at a self-portrait without thinking the word is synonymous with self-portrait? Cindy Sherman.
Right. That's right.
Good for her.
Now moving, I'm mindful of time, but of course we want to move to one of the funner things here is all of those amazing images you took out and about in Studio 54 and elsewhere. And the reason I love this one is because, you know, it's like in the middle of the dancing with the hair flying. You know, this is not like off on a break on the side of the dance floor. This is like right in the action. And then I love this. You tell us about this, because this looks like it's literally behind the DJ booth of Studio 54, if I'm not mistaken.
It is definitely it's literally, and it's 4 a.m.
Oh
I've written my neck, it's 4 a.m. And the woman's name is Patou, P-A-T-O-U. And she said she was a croupier. She's French. She said she was from Paris. She had a French accent. And she told me that she was a croupier, a blackjack dealer in Atlantic City. And I would just see her a lot. And she wanted to be photographed.
Well, two things. One of them is that, of course, it's kind of really fun to look at. She's like this really sexy lady. And then you've got all the wires, kind of like, this is what you're not supposed to see out on the dance floor. And also, I have to say, if you can get back there, you must have really had some connections, Meryl, because...
No, it wasn't. You just wandered into it. No, there's so many other things. And when I'm proud, I have a young nephew, a 24-year-old DJ. He's very proud that his favorite DJs share my pictures. Like, my aunt is cool because I showed the DJ booth.
That's great. This is great. And again, there's something about this that reminds me of that man in the three-piece suit at the wedding jumping, because there's just something very joyful and fun. You know, whether you're in a suburb in Rockville Center at a wedding or you're in Studio 54, it's this kind of very, you know, kind of joyful moment that you capture. Silver boots stretched on floor. And again, I compared this to Lartigue because I couldn't help but to, when I saw this image, of course, this poor woman's falling off of a motorcycle, but there was this uncanny similarity. They both look like they're having fun, even though it's a very different context.
Yeah, and she's laughing. It's great.
Laughing their head off.
I love it. Love it. And his
Yeah.
Lartigue's early photographs were actually stereographic. They were stereo images. I went to a show in Paris. I mean, yes, of them, and like we had looked through the original pictures, looked through stereo.
Which is amazing, where you actually look through the lenses and you see the two images that make it look 3D-like. And then, you know, I did include some of the photographs you captured, because let's face it, I don't think there's anything quite like that anymore, where, I mean, one of the reasons people wanted to get into Studio 54 is because you were not going to be just amongst anyone, you were going to be amongst these huge celebrities. And Warhol was literally a staple of like every happening club and party at the time.
I'm surprised he got so much work done. He was definitely out all the time. Yes.
Isn't it incredible? I mean, in some of the research I've done of photography in those years, it looks like he was everywhere.
I agree.
And with a camera. So there's photos of him and there's the photos he took.
Yes.
And then you captured here your friend Judy Jupiter right alongside Grace Jones.
And Judy Jupiter, who you met at my opening and we're still friends, she went 3 weeks ago. She was in Fire Island and she's showing this picture off to somebody she's sitting next to. And he goes, "That's me." The guy to the right, wearing a suit. She met him.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I had his name and then the couple, the woman to his left and the man behind Grace Jones were like the firm that kind of put her on the map. It's like, isn't it amazing? And they run into each other all the time now.
Oh, that's so great. And by the way, one of the treats of going to Meryl's show at Clamp Art was that I got to meet Judy Jupiter, and there she was, you know, standing next to one of the many photographs of that era. And so there was just something amazing, really, Meryl, of like seeing you and Judy next to one of your photographs there. And it was like, what is it, 30 years later? Or,
no, it's like it's 77 to 80.
Yeah. That was such a treat. And she's, you know, she is in a lot of your photographs.
44 years later, 44. We've been friends for 44 years.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Another wonderful photograph here you caught of Shirley MacLaine with Bella Abzug, the big, well, not only lawyer and US representative, but huge women's rights advocate.
And now it's her birthday party, and I thought she was so old. And that little man, the face between Shirley and Bella, with the guy with his eyes closed, that's Steve Rubell, one of the co-owners of Studio 54.
Oh, right here, of course. He's very easy to spot. And then this is already outside of Studio 54, but I love this, you know, you capturing the Village People, such an iconic group of that time, of the disco era. And they're leaving the grand ballroom there and you catch them as they're stepping down.
And I believe they're going to perform at Xenon. They're stepping out of there and going to Xenon next to it. One of the many opening nights.
Oh my gosh, the Indian. And then I love that you spend time at Les Mouches. For those of you that don't know French, Les Mouches refers to the flies. I guess in Paris, you can ride those boats down the Seine called the, is it the, I forgot.
The Bateau-Mouche.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Well, this club was called Les Mouches. Tell us about this. And
well, I mean, Studio 44 was just one club. There were just so many, and I think I hit almost all of them in Manhattan. But it was a private club, but sometimes let non-members in, or they had special events. There was a roving party called Le Clique. I think this was a Clique night, and the theme was the prom. There was often many disco nights had theme nights. How you dress, and this was the prom. So these are the prom contestants.
oh my God! Oh, that's so funny. And you know that this again, and you've talked about the influence on you of the works by the Hungarian French artist Brassai, because his famous book Paris at Night was all about going out and looking at bistros and clubs in Paris and looking at and bumping into people. And I had to compare this to this Madame Bijou at the Bar de la Lune, because again, you're going out and you're finding interesting people to photograph at night.
In Versailles, in my photo 101 class, Versailles work really stood out to me. Really, hookers on the streets, the same-sex clubs, the bars, they fascinated me. And when I started when I was going out, I realized this is my nightlife. This is my Paris of the 30s.
Yeah.
And I felt like Versailles, but I was also partying as well, or dancing, whatever you want to call it, going out.
I can completely see why. Those parallels are incredible. And Brassai really was showing, I think, the world parts of Paris that were at night and in places they wouldn't normally frequent. And it was really groundbreaking. I love this. This is Xenon. You said it was kind of the rival to Studio 54 at some point, also in the theater.
And the silver guy, his name is Mark. I forgot his last name, but he was known as Mr. 10 and a half, and it wasn't the size of his shoes. He was a porn star. And he was a co-star on The Devil and Miss Jones, Mark Stevens. He was also
yes.
He was also photographed by Mapplethorpe, which focused on the length of his nickname.
Oh my God. And it looks like they're painted either gold or silver.
There's silver that night, other times they were gold. He was a performer.
I love it. And then I love this because you capture these women embracing on the floor near Judy Jupiter's legs. So I love that Judy is there.
Yeah.
She
wants to be known. She wants to be identified, and I don't blame her. And this was that's why I ended up doing a second book, because I had so much of this, and I couldn't believe this image. It shocked me that I had it. And studying my work.
But again, it's again reminiscent. Again, the Brassai maybe is a little bit tamer, but Brassai was very interested, and he would tell people, okay, let me set this up a little bit, because he was very obvious. He was there with his big camera and his flash. But it took me back to those scenes of Brassai. And then this comparison, I had fun looking at this, because these are guys in Fire Island at a Star Wars party. And then Brassai again had, famously shown men dancing at a ball, and, same-sex bars and clubs that it's in many ways very parallel. This is the 70s in Fire Island, and that was men in Paris in 1932.
Totally.
And then just a few more images of the clubs. You know, this is a great image of, I wanted to have an image that shows that famous logo of CBGB's down in the East Village, because you weren't just in the big disco clubs, you were also in those places. And here's, you know, all these folks lining up to go in. People may remember CBGB's was kind of the home to big new acts like Blondie, the Talking Heads, the Ramones. It became almost like the launching pad for some huge stars, punk and otherwise. And I love this because, again, this is a kind of person that you wouldn't have found at Studio 54, maybe, but he's much more East Village and much more CBGB.
And I photographed him because he was interesting, but he's actually a well-known performer. His name is Stiv Bators, Stivbators, and he was the lead singer of the Dead Boys.
Oh, okay. It's fun. It's fantastic, and his whole face and his whole, like, he's definitely posing for you there. It's fun. And then Gigi Barnum's, tell us, Meryl, it looks like it had a Circus Barnum's kind of theme going on.
Oh, it was fantastic. In fact, one of the nights I got rejected from Studio 54. No big deal. Let's go to another club. And Gigi Barnum's, like I said, it was very gender variant, and there were overhead there was a full flying trapeze artist over your head. And this is one of the trapeze, but went up to upper floor and saw the trapeze artist, and you can see the people below. And that was an amazing club. And it was named, and the person who started it named it after Barnum and Bailey, the circus.
Of course.
And for a Gilded Grape, a different club this person owned that catered to people who you might have called transvestite then, or transgender, or a cross-dresser. It was an amazing club.
That's right.
And all these clubs had great music and great sound systems.
Yeah, I mean, these clubs in New York in the 70s were known for almost raising the bar on what clubs could be, and creating a real fantasy and having huge parties and having, like you said, trapeze artists and just things that had never ever been done before. And now, and I'm mindful of time, but I hope people can obviously stay on. We are moving now to maybe not the best of times. It was a little bit of the more difficult side. And one of the things about this is that you move into color photography, and you are now taking us to your world as a teacher in Bushwick. And this is actually a snowstorm you caught from your classroom window in the high school, well, in the intermediate school that you worked at.
Yes.
And this just shows people again, you know, here we are 1 minute, we're in the glamorous clubs of New York, and then not too much later, we're in Bushwick, in, you know, parts of Brooklyn and other boroughs that were really, really quite depressed. I compared this, and this was my way of just saying that I think people might benefit from knowing that it was in 1976 that both William Eggleston and Stephen Shore had the first shows of color photography at Moma. So actually, it's not that surprising, in my view, that Meryl moved to color, because you know, for years, color photography had been considered, oh, well, that's just, you know, your Kodak snapshots that you take, they're not important. But it was in the 70s that Eggleston and Stephen Shore had shows of color photography that are considered almost groundbreaking, because they elevated color photography to be like, this is now real art. And Meryl is using color here. And interestingly, it's not only color, but she's capturing some things that are really not nearly as happy as people dancing in Studio 54. And again, this is why I think, Meryl, eventually your work really does compare and contrast these worlds, you know, these incredibly different worlds of New York. And I have to say that there are other artists that have focused on destruction and despair. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say the beauty of destruction. There's something troubling, there's something horrible, but when you look at these images in all their glory, so to speak, with the detail and the color and the contrast, Roberto Polidori is an artist from Canada that has gone and done things like take a tour of New Orleans right after the Katrina flood. And by the way, his images are really huge, and they're these gorgeous, gorgeous prints. And I couldn't help but to compare some of what Meryl was doing even earlier on, which is just to kind of document the despair and kind of the demise of these structures. And yet, when you look at Meryl's work, I would say, you know, amongst that destruction and that kind of depressed neighborhood, you have these wonderful moments of humanity and intimacy and very beautiful personal moments. And this family is having a picnic surrounded by, you know, graffiti and a car that looks beaten up and abandoned. And so there's joy, and there's the ability of finding joy and family and friendship and warmth, even amongst all of that. I think it's very touching. I loved this moment, and this time
Yep.
Meryl told me to take credit for the photograph, which is embarrassing. But this is a photograph I took of Meryl at her clamp art show with these women that are related to the folks in that photograph. And that was so special. It's like, these ladies are actually, they were like, there's my grandpa, there's my, you know, their neighbor. I don't know if you want to speak to this, Meryl. I thought it was.
They saw their work on Instagram, and yes, their uncles and dad. I mean, and I knew it was them when I saw their face, because they had I knew it. You know, just instinctively, and that it totally.
That was absolutely incredible to meet these young women that were related to the folks in the photograph.
And the best thing they told me was that they said, we tried to tell our nieces how wonderful their dads was because they passed away. They said, and you captured their authenticity, and that just warmed my heart to pieces.
Amazing. This image, I think it's gorgeous and very special, because it's this idea that even with this backdrop that's terribly burned and terribly kind of, well, it's upsetting, it's heart-wrenching. You've got this beautiful little tree, magnolia tree growing, and this little boy and this guy, and it's almost as if people are alive, plants are alive, there's life even in these places that can look so difficult. And I compared this to another series by Roberto Polidori. He actually spent time in what he called in his book, the zones of exclusion. These were the areas that were hit by Chernobyl and the nuclear reactor. And if you see those images, you can see the little plants. It's almost as if you might have this, but you still have nature and life still goes on. And I just thought, you know, it really reminded me of that. It's this beautiful idea that humans and nature move ahead despite, you know, the atrocities that might exist around them. And then, I mean, this, Meryl, it's just incredible that, you know, this was Bushwick. And Bushwick, by the way, now is this kind of happening hip place full of artist studios, which is really wonderful. It's become like an artist, one of the key communities, I think, with artist studios. But this is what you were documenting back then.
And that was progress. They were cleaning up then. They were cleaning up the lots to take away.
Right. And once again, I love this image because even in a neighborhood like that, that's, you know, so full of things that are broken down and burnt and whatever, you've got these adorable kids fixing a bike, right? And so it's, in a way, it's part of that cleanup, right? It's part of we're making things better, we're fixing this bike. And I love the sense of community of these kids. I found this one really touching in many ways because you've got this little boy looking at the images of the haircuts in a beauty salon. And I want you to take a look at it carefully for a moment, because there's things that are quite tough about it. Check out the little children that he's looking at. First of all, it was an opportunity to mention one of your teachers, Lisette Model, because she did a series of reflections of stores in New York, and it really took me there. It's like, that is what it was about. It was about looking at the mannequins and the reflections of New York. And this is something I saw a lot in street photography, photographers being really intrigued by storefronts and what, you know, that duality between what's behind the window and then the reflection against it. But the other thing is that it took me to Gordon Parks, because Gordon Parks is one of the photographers that best documented segregation in the South and even in DC and other parts of the US. And I couldn't help but to link this little boy looking at these very white kids in the beauty salon to this image that Gordon Parks took of Andrea Tanner and her grandmother window shopping in Mobile, Alabama, and look at the mannequins.
But as I was taking, because it's one of those rare photographs where I didn't ask permission because I would lose the moment, Walker Evans inspired me with, well, the contrast, of course, almost like, and also the signage, the typography, the story. I thought Walker Evans would have taken the photograph as well.
Oh, absolutely. Walker Evans was so much about documenting also American architecture and American storefronts and American signage. And you're absolutely right. That's a wonderful comment.
And photos of photos.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we're almost at the end. Thanks for your patience. You know, you really do take us into your world inside that junior high or intermediate school. And by the way, Meryl, I saw that one of the articles in the New Yorker was very specifically about that. It was almost like, wow, this teacher, photographer slash teacher took us into the world of her classroom and her kids. And I love this young man that's like a guardian angel. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
It was one of my students, and he came in his outfit one day, and I said, that's my classroom. That's my, that's lesson, a perspective lesson on the wall. And I just said, can I take your photograph? That's it. And that's my colleague on the right, Mr. Kitchens. And he's, you can imagine how much that's at least 60 pounds. He's carrying this.
I know that the expression that came to me when I saw this is the idea that, when you do heavy lifting, like teachers do some heavy lifting, it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
literal. It's like
Yes.
the math books. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And the reason I love this is because you've got these students in chairs listening to guest speaker. And of course, they look in a way like all universal teenagers that probably would look that way no matter what country or what time frame you're looking at. It's like they look about as interested.
And Dale Kaplan is like the director of photography at Swan Galleries. She was a curator of shows. She was giving a photography guest. And by then I was teaching photography. There were pinhole photographs on the wall and cameras set up. And the kids would look, yes, they're looking like, okay, we're being good.
Right. It's like
We're being good.
it's like, okay.
Okay, we're not throwing anything. Okay, we're being good. Okay.
Okay, yes, this is about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And then finally, what I just was at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and this photographer there, Dawood Bey, one of his series is called I want to say Classroom, and it's a double meaning because it's a series of photographs he took of kids in high school, their portraits, and the word class takes on two meanings. It's class because it's a classroom, but it's also about differences in class. So he might have a kid like this and a very different kid like that. And in this work that's really interesting, he actually has these kids write something about themselves, and some of what you read in these, next to these portraits is really tough. So like this guy, Antoine, talks about, when I was 7 years old, my father went to jail, and that left me just with a mother. So, but I thought it was interesting that, you took us to this world in the classroom, and this particular artist that's actually up at the Whitney does something similar and tries to, brings us close to these kids and their context and what they're about.
And Darwin Ray was a CETA photographer. He too was.
Oh my.
And so that launched his career. He photo his portraits of Harlem. So he got known, but there were many photographers documenting life in New York.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. That's great. And so basically, this is just to say we are fortunate. Meryl posted this on her social media. She just completed a new dark room that looks gorgeous. And so lucky for us, she continues to photograph. And I want to thank Meryl so much for being here and for your time. And I do want to invite you to visit her website, because actually what I realized when I saw her books at Clamp Art, it's like, I could not believe the size of her archive is enormous. So like what we saw tonight is really a little sampling. It's just such an extensive archive, and it's very, very exciting to really look at, and you can see much more of it at, merylmeisler.com.
Thank you. Thank you.
So with that, I'll open it up to questions and comments. I know I had muted everyone, so please raise your hands, either physical or otherwise, and I'll make sure I unmute you. Let's see.
Well, just so some person wrote to me about what camera I use. I'll come and get it.
Darren, I saw you raise your hand.
So Meryl, thank you so much for
Hold on
sharing.
1 second, because Meryl stepped away. I want to make sure she hears.
Yeah.
I brought back to my this is a camera, the same model camera that I used in the 70s. It's not the same physical camera, but same lens, and a 280 Vivitar flash, and I'm back to film because I love it. It's sexier. And of course I shoot with my phone or anything. The best camera is the one you have on you. But I built a darkroom. I'm gonna use it.
Fabulous. This work is so great, and thank you, Efren, for bringing it all together so nicely and drawing these great connections. I mean, I certainly appreciated the work on its own, but then also, you know, the layer that you add is so special, especially, you know, with the sort of the Versailles comparisons were really magnificent. I did have a quick Jewish geography question, Meryl. Did you have family in Merrick?
Did my family what?
In Merrick, because it said the.
Oh, Massapequa.
No, but it said the cache for cache.
Oh, okay. My parents belonged to a mystery club. I think my mother started it, and it was like 15 couples who, until they all became snowbirds and retired to Florida for like 20 years, would go out like once a month or every other month, and two couples, named wives, would plan a mystery evening, very inexpensive, maybe like $50 a couple. They were just told whether they needed to eat anything else beforehand, if they had to wear something special, where to show up, and it was just a mystery evening. They would be hysterical. Next day, my parents would be hysterical laughing. What did you do last night in the mystery club? This didn't make me who I am. Oh, they met at a cemetery and they went to a haunted house. We went to a seance. My parents went to the Continental Baths with the Mystery Club, which was a gay male bathhouse, and they saw Liza Minnelli's husband perform. They went and visited a nudist colony. They were not swingers and wife swappers. They were open-minded. They would go see a rocket ship being built at Grumman's. So I kind of, it's in reflection, in Sassy 70s, I had one of the other grown children of the Mystery Club writing about it, because it kind of informed who we were in a lot of ways. That we had these parents who not only had lifelong good friendships, but they found adventure like within 45 minutes. You didn't have to travel around the world. It was right there, and they were so open-minded that who they saw, what they saw, and it was all educational, it was all fun, and I think that definitely influenced who I am. So the Merrick was a Mystery Club family member. I wanted to photograph not just my family and friends growing up on the block, but the members of the Mystery Club, because they were
I love it. Yeah. Thank you.
Aren't you glad you asked that question?
It's fascinating.
It's amazing.
Sam, do you have a
question? And they kept it up. Yes. And I love Efren's comparisons and images and all the making maps and the timeline. You're amazing. Thank you, Efren.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Comparisons were amazing. I was just wondering, do you ever take color photographs and then reprint them as black and white?
I do.
I do not take color photographs and print them as black and white. When I'm shooting with black and white, I see in black and white. I'm choosing it. I guess I'm a purist. You know, if it's color, it's color. If it's black and white, it's black and white. That is my choice. Mm-hmm. The answer is no. I don't flip them that way.
Okay.
But for many years, I painted on my photographs. But I didn't change them.
I'm mindful of time. I don't want to keep people all evening, and the men's gymnastics are on.
That's right.
Half an hour. I'm joking. Any other questions or comments for Meryl? No. Meryl, we have all these wonderful comments that'll be recorded, and I'll make sure you have them from the chat. But I want to thank everyone so much, because we know that, you know, one thing was to join me and join us in the midst of COVID in the winter, but now it's a nice summer day in a lot of places. So your joining means a lot to us. And do be on the, I want to thank Meryl so much.
Oh.
Meryl had a great summer. She had several shows. She had a lot of different talks, interviews, articles, and the fact that she made the time to join me and this group is very exciting.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Meryl. And
Thank you.
please stay tuned, because in the fall, I'll have a few new lectures. I want to look at abstraction and photography. Many of you wanted to talk about fashion photography, so that's going to be a whole to-do. It'll be very exciting. So stay in touch. Have a great evening, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Stay well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Meryl.
Bye. Thank you.